So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our teacher extraordinaire. She actually needs no introduction, and Ricki Lobel.
Thank you. I know you want to have some copies of his 13 principles as we get ready to start. Excuse me. That mic is really close to my coughing place. So I just want to say, every picture I've ever seen of Maimonides has him in his light turban and his embroidered jacket, so it only seemed fair. I did consider, for authenticity's sake, to stop tweezing for a while, so that I might have a little bit of tea as well, but then I thought, no, not going there. But I also want to let you know that if the NSA shows up to get me, when I went to go buy, it's not easy to get a turban, but when I bought the turban and they rang it up for me, it's called a Taliban turban. So I am now totally on record as having bought a Taliban turban. So if the NSA comes looking, we'll know why. All for you. So. And I will try so hard not to be coughing too much. I'm just getting over that cold that barely had me at Shulam Saturday. So, my topic tonight, I know that the series is called Who Are the Rabbis? But I'm not really going to be going into who are the rabbis or who was the rabbi. For me, the issue is really not the biography of the man himself, but really the biography of the text, of what these 13 principles meant, how they came into being, and what they can and cannot mean for us, and what we choose to have them mean for us, and what we choose not to have them mean for us. I'll just give you a little bit of a context without really going into much about Maimonides himself. He was born in Cordoba, Spain, at a time when it was Islamic, so he was surrounded by an Islamic government, which at the time allowed for peaceful coexistence among the faiths. Really didn't have a whole lot of this is in the 1100s. He really didn't have a whole lot of involvement with the Christian community, mostly with the Islamic community. He lived there. His family lived there in relative peace and able to study for a long time until a group called the Almohads took over, and they did not allow for free exercise of other religions. And so at that point his family left Cordoba, and so his impression of what the Islamic community was like changed from a more benign one into one that was a little more malevolent. And they spent a lot of years hiding throughout Spain, hiding in caves, not really finding a place to live until eventually they ended up in Morocco, in the city of Fez. In Morocco he had a lot of guilt and some people say that while they were there, he actually converted to Islam in order to save his life, in order to get along in the community. He had a lot of guilt over people who were martyring themselves so as not to have that happen. But he believed that it was something that was permissible and beyond permissible. And in a famous letter that he wrote, he said that the people who publicly converted to Islam and presented that face to the world, but privately on their own continued to practice Judaism, were not doing something wrong. That was wholly permissible because it was a way for our faith to survive, given the hostility of the community. But it was still very difficult, so he did leave and go to Israel for a while. It was not the place for him, actually. And so he ended up in what later became Cairo. He ended up living the rest of his life in Egypt. So he lived in a world where Islam was a very, very powerful force. It could be a force for good, it could be a force for force and intolerance as well as tolerance. But if nothing else, he knew it was powerful, it was really potent. And in looking at the difference between the draw that Islam had for so much of society, because while he and others may have been pretending to convert, there were a lot of Jews who were converting, seriously. And he believed that one of the main differences, is that Judaism did not offer its followers a theology. That there really was not any attempt prior to that to define God, to study who God was. That we were a system of laws, we were a system of study, we were a system of expectations of human behavior. But to actually delve into who God was and what his motivations were and what he wanted and having a personal relationship, that was not really what he saw we had. Other religions had a catechism. The Islam practice had what they call aqidas, which is very much like our Akedah. It's what binds people together, as we bound Isaac. And that was supposed to bind people to God, to give him a personal relationship. We did not have that. We had do this or this, do this or this will happen. And he wasn't really comfortable with that, and he thought that if he could do something about that, while still being true to what was out there, that might make Judaism have a better chance of surviving in an Islamic world. And so, besides being a scholar, he was a philosopher, and he wanted to create that theology that would attract people and keep people in the Jewish faith. And so, when he was writing his commentary on the Mishnah, on the compendium of oral Torah, and the rules that go with it, when he was writing that, when he got to the Mishnah Sanhedrin, there's a chapter in it that begins with, all of Israel have a portion in the world to come, except one who maintains that resurrection is not biblical, or that the Torah is not divine, or an Epicurus, a heretic. And then that text continues to go on to all of the things that make a person not worthy of the world to come, and all of the many ways in which they will be punished, short-term, long-term, eternally, for not living up to what it takes to get into the world to come. And so in his introduction to this, before explaining this set of really rigid, difficult rules that were being placed out and consequences that were being given to people, he decided to write these 13 principles instead. That it isn't just sticks. It isn't just sticks and carrots that makes us do what we're supposed to do. It is a deeply intense and personal relationship with an eternal living God who knows us and loves us and is involved in our lives that makes us do the things that will help us to inherit that world to come. That was what he wanted us to understand. So even though he was providing a very rigorous analysis of text and law and reward and punishment, even though he was continuing in that Mishnaic line of the sages, he, in his introduction, wanted to delve away from it and say, this really isn't the be-all and end-all. There is more to us than that. There's definitely more to God than that. And there's definitely more to our motivations to that. That we shouldn't be motivated by fear of what terrible things are going to happen to us if we don't. We should be motivated by the love that creates us to reach heights of new understanding that we didn't have before. For him, that was very important. Not to be scared, but to have that goal. And in doing so, these things are not simply to help us get into the world to come. These things are to make us part of Klal Yisrael, of the community of the people of the entirety of Israel. And if we don't think these things, if we don't have those things in common, then we're outside of that community. And really for so many in that time, that was the worst punishment, not death and stoning and all of the other wonderful things that they came up with, but to be cut off. To be cut off was one of the worst fates that you could have. To have to be out of the community, to not be part of Klal Yisrael. And so he wanted us to have not just an intellectual desire to be a part of it, but a real emotional draw, to be a piece of that community, to be a piece of our people. And so he thought long and hard about which pieces he was going to put into his 13 principles. Because he believed that anything that went in there was supposed to be something that, having that awareness, and acknowledging its truth really made a difference in our ability to relate to God and in our ability to relate to and understand the Torah.
Was the number 13 chosen prior to his writing?
It wasn't chosen for him, this was his writing.
No, I don't mean that.
Well,
He decided there were going to be 13 principles.
right. Right, well 13 is an important number. We have the 13 attributes of God, which I'll be going into when I do Cordovero and his 13 principles in Talmud Devorah. So 13 as a set of attributes is a number that's used quite often. So he wanted to make sure that these were ones that would prompt this kind of relationship, and that without any one of them, we wouldn't be bound together. The ties would loosen. And so he needed to pick things that he was going to include that would bring us all together and make a significant difference in our lives. So his real purpose was inclusionary. His purpose was law and our practice should not give you fear, should not exclude you, make you want to go running to something else. Rather, it should embrace you, it should hold you in, and make you want to stay there. So there was that appeal of being included, of being part of a people, that was important to him. I don't know that he would have foreseen a day that Teddy would be saying, you know, I know we're the chosen people, but could you choose someone else once in a while? That being part of the Klal Yisrael is not always a gift. But for him it was. It was such a gift that he wanted to make sure as many people had the opportunity to do it. Of course, this was one of those cases, and we'll talk about it later, where the best laid plans of mice and men do not turn out the way that we expect them to go. And yes, I know it's off a glee, but I wasn't going to go into my Scottish. So it doesn't really work out that way, and we'll see why as we go through what these are. So let's go through what these are, what might work for us, because what I want you to think about as we're doing them is, if these are the 13 things that make you a Jew, are you a Jew? Not so sure. Because I think for many people, not all of these 13 beliefs are very comfortable. And we don't even really have evidence necessarily that they were also comfortable for Maimonides either. But still, in some of his later writings we see it especially. But if he's saying for you to honestly be a Jew, a practicing Jew, a part of the community of Israel, the living, breathing community, you have to think these. I'm thinking many of us aren't. But I'm also wondering if that matters. Does it matter that he thought we weren't? Because what can we make peace with that's in it, rather than the way that he looks at it? So the first one, I believe with perfect faith that God is the creator and ruler of all things. He alone has made, does make, and will make all things. So his belief before anything else, just like in our 10 Commandments, right? I am the Lord your God is the very first one. His belief before anything else begins is this belief absolutely in the existence of God. And not only that God exists, but that nothing else exists except by virtue of his existence. If he didn't exist to create, there'd be nothing else. So it's inconceivable that he doesn't exist because we're here. The fact that anything else exists is testament to the fact that he does, since he creates it all. A little circular. And again, these are things that are so self-evident to him that he can't understand that anyone would not see that. That's not the same in the 21st century, or even in 18th and 19th centuries. But if God did not exist, everything else would cease to exist as well. And nothing else new could come into light, could come into being. Without the rest of us, however, God would be perfectly fine. He would continue to exist. And I'm going to say he, and I'm not saying he because I believe God is a man. I'm saying he because that's the word that's used in so much of the translation. That's the word that most of us grew up with. Sometimes I'll do a she, sometimes I'll do a they because there's a plurality of it. But if I say he, please don't be offended. But even though without God, if God did not exist, none of us, nothing would, no trees, no birds, nothing in creation would exist without him. If the rest of creation disappeared like that, God would still be there. God exists absolutely. He simply is. Okay? Everything else needs to be created. Everything else needs to be supported. Everything else needs to be sustained on some level. But God just is. He is not contingent on anything. Everything is contingent on him. Only he innately is. He is the cause of everything, but nothing causes him. He is the source of everything, but he did not need a source. He simply was. He is the agency, but no agency creates him. So his absolute existence, therefore, makes him absolute truth. Anything he does is emes. Anything he does is reality, because he's all there is. He's the only thing that needs no conditions to be there. He's absolute. And so everything yields to him, which makes any values he presents to us absolute and eternal as he is, which makes everything he values something that was there before time and something that will continue after time. Everything is part of his service because it's contingent upon him to even exist. We are ephemeral, we are temporary, and our existence depends on his desire to have us continue to exist. It's a gift every second that we live, every second that we're here, is by virtue of his wanting us to be here that second. And we should always remember that. And because we should know that, because it should be in our conscience, that the fact that we exist is because he wants us to, then that should prod us to want to have a relationship with him. If someone is doing something so wonderful as to give us our existence, then we should want to get to know that benefactor. We should want to know him the best that we can. We should want to serve him, make him want to continue wanting to keep us around. And we should want to be as close and as knowing as we possibly can. If we don't see him as being this absolute, simply there, without any strings, without any possibility that he won't be there, but simply having been there always, then instead of being God, instead of being absolute, he's just really powerful. You know, he's Superman. He's got strength beyond the powers of mortal man. He can stop a steel, you know. He can do all of these wonderful things. But that's all he is amazing. So then there's really just a quantitative difference between him. Okay, I'm strong, but he's stronger. Okay, I know a lot, but he knows more. Then it's just a kind of a quantitative difference instead of a real qualitative difference. He is an entirely different kind of existence on an entirely different plane than I have. And we need to remember that difference. We need to remember that for who he is. So knowing that he is all there is, knowing that he exists in a plane of his own, in a reality of his own, that he is absolute, that he was not created, he cannot be destroyed. That's something that we then have to take into account nowadays to say, well, how does that go with the Big Bang Theory? How does that go with everything about science and evolution that we know? If the existence of every single thing is contingent upon his desire to have that be created, and the only entity that can create is him, then how do we explain hybrids? How do we explain mapping the genome and creating new species? How do we explain the creation of new organisms? Not through the divine hand, but through ours. So the ability to believe in this universal absolute has changed. For some, he is who he is. I am what I am, I will be what I will be. That's all there is. But for some, that's a real problem now. It's real difficult to be able to understand how you reconcile the things that we've come to know about our universe, about creation, and about the possibility of things that we thought couldn't be created, being created out of what? Did he create out of nothingness? Did he create out of somethingness? Has changed a lot of people's ability to look at believing with perfect faith that he's the creator and ruler of all things, and that he is the only one who has created, he is the only one who continues to create, and he is the only one who will create in the future. The more we begin to assume some of those powers ourselves, the more we begin to have questions about who God really is. So that's our first one. Second one, I believe with perfect faith that God is one. There is no unity that is in any way like his. He alone is our God. He was, he is, and he will be. Now this is partly something that we say all of the time when we do our Shema, that Adonai, our God, is one. We talk about him being one. But that part of that oneness, part of that unity that nothing else can possibly ever achieve, is the fact that he exists across all time, past, present, and future, and across all space. There's no place that he is not in. If he is in all time, from the beginning of time till the end of time, should there be such a thing, but certainly our foreseeable time, if he is in all of those times at the same time, all the time, if he is in all space at all times, in all places, then that doesn't leave room for anybody else. It doesn't leave room for another deity. It doesn't leave room for there to be anybody else because he's there already. There's no way for somebody to sneak in and be the God of this or the God of that because he's already there. He's got it covered. It's taken. That job's done. So he can't, no one else can come in. So there is no space for anybody else to come in independent of him. Everyone is separate would not work. So the fact that he is one implies that he's the only. He's all there is. That's not the way that the rest of the universe is. There are billions of us. There are billions of species. There are all different kinds of land formations. Everything else exists in multiples. Okay, the universe has plenty of creations. There are biological, there are physical, there are natural, there are all different kinds of variations, there are anomalies. Everything else exists in multiplicity, except for God. There is nothing that is unified in one way. Even if we look at a species as being one species, within that species, each individual life is different from the one next to it. Within a nation, we may be one nation, but we are hardly the same. We are all individual ones. So there are so many of us. Even in a pair of something, the two aren't exactly the same. So everything else in this big collective of people, of animals, of plant life, everything else can be divided and subdivided some more, and looked at in smaller and smaller increments, except for God. There's no dividing him. There's no breaking him up into pieces. He is all. And so because of that, there's no parallel for him. So everything that we experience, all of these forces in the universe that affect us all of the time, all of them are a reflection somehow, including us, of his oneness. All of those things coexisting at the same time in all space within his unity, because it was all conceived by him and created by him. So we can't manipulate him. We can't appeal to one side of him as opposed to others, because he's all of it at the same time, not one being any greater. This is a kind of a problem in a lot of ways. If you think in your Chumash, if you think in your Siddur about who God is, he isn't one, right? He's Elohim, he's Adonai, he's Hamakom, he's Hagibor, he's Adon Olam, he's Ribono Shel Olam, he's Adonai Tzavaot, he's Sur Yisrael, he's Magen Avraham, he's Malchei Hamlachim, he is all of these things. We call him all of these things without ever feeling like we're talking to a different person, or a different being, or a different God. He is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That doesn't stop him from being Avinu Sheva Shamayim, which doesn't stop him from being Harachaman. He is all of those things, and we can look at him as being all of those things. And I'll have to throw in the feminine one. He's Shekhinah too. So he can be all of those things at the same time without there being any problem. It's like the facets of a gemstone. They all reflect differently, but they're still the same stone. They're not something different. And so he can be all of those things at the same time. But our liturgy doesn't really always look at him that way. So even though we're saying you can't break him up, and you can't appeal to one aspect of him instead of all of them at the same time, when we begin to say our Amidah, we start out very clearly in avot mode. We're talking about our fathers and the fact that he knew our fathers, he had this relationship with our fathers, he's our father. All of these fatherly things as we begin to approach, we do our little steps because he's a king, and then we kind of get really, really close. And we start coming at him for the side of him. Come on, you know you love Jacob, you know you loved Isaac, you know that you love, right? You know that, so I know it too. So if you love them, and I'm from them, you know, we have a thing too. So we're coming at him at that. But then we kind of stand back again. And we say, oh, you are so big and strong and powerful, Hagibor, you are my hero. I think you're just swell. I know there's nothing that I could want that you couldn't do for me, big, handsome, strong guy, you. So we go from looking at him at one, if you aren't going to do what I want because I'm kind of coming at you as my daddy, then maybe you'll comment because I'm like your biggest fan, I think you're so cool. But then we move back again and we move into praising, into thanking him for all these things. You know, these are the things I want. Could you kind of, huh? Could you kind of? Because you did it before and I know you can do it. So would you, huh? So we come at him like a child asking for things. And then we come back with all the thanks. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. If you'll just do this for me, thank you. In one prayer, we've already given him so many identities and certainly tried to manipulate and play on every single one of them in order to get what we want. Even if we want is benevolent, we want, like Miss America, we want world peace. But we want health and we want rain and we want, you know, all these wonderful things. Even if what we're asking for isn't, I want to win the lottery, although some people I'm sure throw those things into the personal parts. Even if we're not asking for that, we're still asking in a very manipulative way, trying to hone, okay, I'll take this piece of him, and if he doesn't like that, I'll take this piece of him, and if he doesn't like that, I'll do this piece of him. And then we'll have our other pieces that we'll say at other times, where we'll talk about him being our father, our king, and giving him this majesty, so that we know, I know my place, I know I'm a servant, I get it. But as long as I'm serving you, you have obligations to servants. You even said that in your Torah, haha. So we play with that all the time. So to say that he's this unity that can't be broken into pieces really belies what we do when we worship him, when we talk to him. We all find a piece of him that's the most comfortable for us to relate to. And we can shift so quickly within even one prayer which piece of him we're working in order to get what we want. So it's a little bit ingenuous for us to say that he's just this one entity, because what we call him changes the nature of our relationship. You know, just like people who call their father, father, people who call their father daddy, I called my father many recipes daddy to the very end. He was daddy. That's a different relationship than father. It's just different. What we call somebody helps to define our relationship, or our relationship helps to determine what we're going to call them. If we're going to call somebody Your Majesty, we are playing on a different piece of him. If we're going to call somebody Dad, we're playing on a different piece. If we're going to call somebody big and strong, we're playing on a different piece. So, from the very beginning, we've looked at this multiplicity not really being unity, but really being different pieces. And if we can, we'll use that to our advantage, because that's the way we are, we're people. So, anything else on that one? Any feelings about that one? Okay. So even though it's kind of, yeah. Exactly. Right, but we're human. The expectation is that God's not so simple. There is no unity like the unity he has. We have all these different facets, and yet we function as individual people. We don't, unless, we have split personalities. We don't function one personality, one piece of us, one piece of us. We have to find our own way of doing it. But even at that, who I am in my classroom is not who I am at home. And who I am at home with my family at home, my son, my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter, is sure not who I am when I'm with my mother. So we take pieces of our own personality and we accept that they're really different. God is not like that. In God, they all exist all the time at the same time. And we shouldn't be able, according to Maimonides, we shouldn't be able to sift through that. We shouldn't be able to parse which piece of him we're talking to or relating to, because it's just all there. And if we try to do that, we'll miss the mark, because he knows better. He knows who he is. So now we have this God who is the only God, the creator of everything, creator of everything that ever was, creator of everything that is now, creator of everything that will ever be. The only creator of all of that, the only one who could create it, even if we are partners in creation, we are not the creators. And he is one. He is one in a way that nothing else is one. Very unique. So now, and most people will accept that he is one in the sense that he's not a trinity. He's not a father, a son, and a ghost. He's not that sort of a division. So for most Jews, this is not a deal breaker of a belief. Believing that he is one and believing that he exists for most. Although for some Jews, and rabbis have said in the modern era, you don't even have to believe in God to be a Jew. That's what my mom is. So now the third one. I believe with perfect faith that God does not have a body. Physical concepts do not apply to him. There is nothing whatsoever that resembles him at all. So God has no physical form in any way. That handsome guy with the white beard and the flowing hair and the white gown pointing his finger over here is not our creation. It's not our image. There is no physical form. He cannot be described by words or acts that belong to someone who has a physical form. He couldn't ever have a body of such infinite space that he could be in every place at the same time. It's an impossibility if he were limited to something that was actually physical. So that would not work. There wouldn't be and there isn't any space that he isn't in, so there's no place for his body to be everywhere. He couldn't be confined in his vision, so if he actually physically had eyes, he would not be able to see all of the things that he sees, which is everything that there is to see, and then some. He wouldn't be limited by having ears to be able to hear all of the people all of the cries, all of the talk, all of the discussion, the prayers. His presence cannot be limited, and his power cannot be limited. And all of those things would be limited if there were a physical body for him to have to contend with. So, the other thing is, if he actually occupied space in a body, we'd be able to get away from him. There's got to be a place he can't get to fast enough, or time for us to do something, or see through, those kinds of things. There's got to be a way for us to avoid him. There's got to be a way for us to elude him, to keep secrets from him, to be unknown to him, if he were limited by a physical body. But that's impossible. So because he has none of those limitations, he can see it all, hear it all, know it all, be there with it all. And there's no getting away from him. He is everywhere. So he's also free from any kind of corruption that would affect a physical body. He can continue to be his perfect self throughout eternity, where others of us get wrinkles and gray hair and put a little on around the middle. He can't be represented in any way materially. So again, the artwork that we see is not Jewish artwork. The artwork that we do generally represents experiences, and it shows emotions, it shows relationships, it shows how we perceive what God has done within the world, but not God himself. That's not for us to draw, because there is nothing to draw. So, again, some of this really does change with what we call him, because many of the things we call him inspire an image. I know that whenever I'm doing either reading or chanting or involved in walking through the Song of the Sea, when I get to Adonai Ish Milchama, he is a man of war. I'm picturing him. I see him in his warrior clothes. I see him ready to do battle. I picture that. I know what he looks like. Standing there in the sea with the people, ready to take on any and all people who would want to conquer us. That's a very visual image. When we talk about him, may God turn his face to you and grant you peace. May he shine the light of his face upon you. How did we get out of Egypt? A mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Right? That's how we left. We have him descending the mountain. We have him rising from being with Jacob along the road. We have him walking in a garden, right? We have him wearing tefillin in Midrash. We have him speaking. We have him listening. We have him arguing. You have to be a pretty physical presence to do any of those things. Non-corporeal beings don't walk in gardens. They don't have mighty hands and outstretched arms. They can't do that. So again, even though this is something he's saying is so basic that we all know it and we all believe it, our texts written by, God, tell us something totally different about him. That he can do very physical, very human-like things. Now, whether we want to say that that's because, for the people that the book was written for, which is everybody for all of eternity, so if we're going to accept that it isn't just written for the shepherds who lived in the desert, that it's for all of us, that's a bigger group than they like to look at. If we're going to say that for the people that it was written for, they couldn't quite grasp this, whatever, out there. And so it was important to give them language they could understand. They could only understand a God who walked in a garden. They could only understand a God who could look at them face to face, even though you better not look back. They could only relate to something that had some physical elements that was like them. If we're in their image, doesn't there have to be an image? How can we be in the image of something imageless? So what we've done in our texts, what we've done in our prayers, what we've done again, if the Torah, which we'll come to later, was written by God, he wrote himself in with body. He wrote himself in with physical capabilities. So, does believing that those things are metaphorical help? Maybe. Maybe as long as we say them in quotes, he turns his face to you. Maybe that helps. But what we've done is we have said that we think there's more to him than that. There's more to him than this something we can't see. So again, it may be something that we believe, it may not be. You may choose to believe it. Where we usually draw the line is him coming to the earth in human form. That's the bridge too far. So when we look at other religions, like Christianity, where God is then incarnated in a human being, when we look at other polytheistic religions or other Middle Eastern religions that had gods who walked the earth like other people, or the pantheon or any of those, we draw the line on those. Excuse me. But we don't really draw the line on saying he's incorporeal. We allow for some of that corporate. So that one is, again, something to be tested and questioned. Number 4, I believe with perfect faith that God is first and last. He's the only thing that always was. He's the only thing that always will be. Everything else is by choice, is by design, is by creation. It can come and it can go. It's here, it's there. It has a beginning, it has an end. It's born, it dies. It exists, it doesn't. It's made, it's destroyed. Only God must be. There is no not having him. There is no time at which he isn't here. So in a way, he's like the ultimate example of free will, which we all like to believe we have, because all of us are here by his free will. We are here, everything is here, because he chooses for us to be here. He chose to create us. He chose to make this world. He chose to have natural law. He chose to have the sun, the other planets. He chose to have all of these things. It was by his design, by his pleasure, by his delight that all of these things, including us, came into being. But he was always there from before there was a beginning, and he will always be there long after we're gone. So his eternal nature is completely unique. There's nothing else. We'd like to say Judaism will last forever. That's very different than a being lasting forever. How something can live on is one thing, but God will just continue. There will be no ending. And he was always there. So everything that comes in between, from him way back here before anything, and him way there after everything's over, everything that's in the middle, including us, is then there with him, in relation to him. So again, knowing that we are in relation to him is something that would motivate us to want to have a good relationship with him, to want to find a way to make that a peaceful, loving, giving, mutual relationship in order to, if for no other reason than to continue to exist, but also out of gratitude, out of love, out of respect, out of the fact that we share the same universe together. So nothing else can be, when we talk about nothing can be compared to God, who is like you, that's one of the ways nothing else can be compared. Nothing else has that kind of eternality of being before the beginning and after the end, of always being there, of being incapable, of not having ever been created and never being destroyed. So in that way, nothing can be compared to him. It also means that we can trace back to the very first of us. Whoever was the very first of us also was in relationship to him because he was here then. And anybody who descends from us, anybody who exists in the future, will also be in relationship with him. Everybody who comes, everybody who's here, everybody who's been. So we need to see ourselves as part of this continuum of relationships with God. And we may not live to see our works fulfilled, but he will never outlive his works. So he has a very vested interest in what we do because we're his works. And so he will continue to outlive us, but he will also continue to create more to take our place. So he's there for us, as he was there for our ancestors, as he will be for everybody who comes along after we die. The question, of course, for a lot of people is, Okay, he's maybe really old. But where did he come from? This is a problem that a lot of, not just Jews have, but to make this one of the centerpieces of you're not part of Israel unless you believe this is difficult for a lot of people. He had to have come from something. How do you just come from, how can you just be? Wasn't there ever a point in time where there was just nothing? And then there was God? And then there was all of this? It's a hard thing for a lot of people to be able to understand or to accept. How could he simply be? Again, a difficult one for some people to be able to deal with. For people with perfect faith, not so hard. For people with modern sensibilities, not so easy. So then the next one. If anybody has anything to say, please say it. Okay. For the next one. So knowing this now, knowing that God is, because these are sort of building upon each other, knowing that God has created everything, so all of us are indebted to him for our very existence, knowing that our existence is based on this incredibly varied, multifaceted being who somehow keeps it all together in a way that we never could, knowing that he is incorporeal and to be in his image is not really to look like him, but to have within us something about him, something special about him, and to believe that he is eternity in every direction of time and space. Then, number 5, I believe with perfect faith, it's only proper to pray to God. And you may not pray to anyone or anything else. If all of those things are true, if he is in fact the be-all, end-all, everywhere, every time, every place, in every direction, for everybody, and his will and his desire and his pleasure are our existence, then obviously it makes the most sense to pray to him and not to go bothering all those other people who say that they're deities somewhere else. It only makes sense to pray to him, to talk to him, to try to make a relationship, and not anyone else. And if we should try to talk to anyone else, if we try to talk to those other gods, if we petition the angels, if we believe in the stars and ask the planets for whatever kind of guidance or to intercede or do anything, we are granting them a power that they don't have. We are saying that they have usurped, pulled, divided somehow this power that is his and his alone. It is innately God's. It is not the power of a star. It is not the power of anything else in the universe except him in that he is the universe. And so, since there is no area that's out of his concern, he's involved in it all. He has his finger, should he have a finger, in everything. His presence is everywhere. Everything is relevant to him. Nothing is too trivial for him. He doesn't delegate to demigods. He doesn't delegate to astrology. He doesn't delegate to anything else. There's no middleman. There's no intermediary. He is the one we should be praying to, and only him. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, what does this make the vast majority of the rest of the world? I don't think Judaism deals with that, but...
Well, no, this is just concerned about being part of Klal Yisrael. They would probably, not accepting those would have them be cut off if they were claiming to be Jewish, but otherwise, you're not the course, you're a heretic. Or, again, there's a knowledge that there were the other faiths. There was certainly a knowledge that there was Islam, but they were misguided. That is not, they're part of their misguidance. Part of their being misguided comes from these later pieces about who the prophets were, and Muhammad not being a true prophet, and Moses being unable to be put down a peg by any other prophet. So they would be misguided in what they were looking at and would need to understand.
Well, I'm thinking more not in terms of any of that. I have no problem with any of that. Judaism doesn't really say anything about those who are not Jewish, does it?
Well, no, it does. Well, some of it's pretty ugly, what it says about people who aren't. I mean, there are an awful lot of people that we've been told that we're supposed to annihilate because they're not part of the people of Israel. We are told that the day will come that all of those people will recognize that in fact God is one. And on that day his name will be one. So there is a belief. We don't condemn them to, fire and brimstone and that kind of thing. There is this hope and belief that at some point those people will come to recognize who God is as well. So we are the only ones who have, and the other thing as far as going to any of those other beings is that God cannot be overruled, he can't be second guessed. Yeah.
You said all these
I'm sorry, can you?
you said all these positive things that what about the things that aren't so positive? You see that too?
Sure. Every one of those aspects is in him, which is why so many of those aspects are in us. Which is why we call him, right, the jealous God. We know that he has that trait. Be careful because God is a jealous God, so watch out. I think we come by our stiff-neckedness honestly. So yes, absolutely. And there's no question in Torah when we read through it that there, when he was ready to destroy us, when there were peoples he destroyed, when he had a bloodlust for the Amalekites. There's no question that those are all parts of his being as well. I'm sorry?
He could be an evil God as well.
He created good as well as evil. So that means that he certainly has that aspect within him. But we would not look at him as being evil any more than we would look at him as being any one of those elements. He's not just merciful. He's not just after retribution. He's not just a punisher or just a rewarder. He's so many things at the same time in that multiplicity. We are the ones who can get stuck in one and not able to get out of it, not him. So because he can't be overruled, he can't be second guessed, he can't be replaced, again, no point in going to somebody else. All of those other beings are programmed. Angels are programmed. They have what they're supposed to do, and that's all they're supposed to do. They have what they're allowed to talk about, and that's all they're allowed to talk about. The stars that go through the skies, the way the constellations move, all of those other things that people may look at and see as having power and want to pray to, he programmed them. He planned where they would be and when they would be and how they would rotate and what they would do. So to pretend that there's something they can do about it or make happen differently is an illusion. It can't be. We are the only ones with free will, and we certainly haven't been granted those kinds of powers, except for taking control of things in our own lives. So as dependent as we are all the time, we're also very independent in our ability to try to sift through these things and decide what to do. And in doing that, we have the best decision we can make is to recognize we have a covenant, we have a two-way relationship with this God who can do all of these things. And he is the one that we should be going to. He is the one for us to have a dialogue with. He is the one for us to have a relationship with. Not necessarily out of need, not because, again, I want to win the lottery, but because of who he is and who we are. We should be in an ongoing dialogue. Prayer for lots of reasons. Prayer to tell him how things are going, how appreciative we are, what we're looking for, what means something to us. So it does not have to be always asking. On the other hand, our asking does not have to trigger a response. The fact that he's listening, the fact that we're in a dialogue, doesn't mean we're going to get everything we want when we petition for something. So that's an assumption that if we do that, which again was a part of other cultures, if I put enough food on the altar, if I do enough of this, I'm going to get what I want. It's not part of what was there. It's building a relationship. It's building communication. It's building something so that even if all you can get is consolation for the fact that he isn't doing what you wanted him to do, consolation from him is plenty. Comfort from him is plenty. To be able to build that kind of conversation. So our prayer can be fixed as in the Siddur. It can be scripted like that. It can be completely spontaneous. It can be very long. It can have 19 parts even when it's called 18. It can be very short. Shortest prayer in Torah is when Moses is asking for Miriam to be healed. It can be personal and private, or it can be completely public and said by a group. There aren't a lot of constraints to what the prayer can be, except for the fact that it is only to God that our prayer is supposed to go. So we do have a difference in what we look at in intermediary capacities. We have a shaliach. When we pray, we have somebody who's on bima or at the shulchan or somewhere who is our messenger to help us to get our prayers through. That person is not praying for us. Nobody can pray for us. That person is enabling us to pray, helping us with the words. If there are words we don't know, if we can't read the prayer, if we have no idea what it says, if it's meaningless recitation and phonetic, that person is helping to make our words mean something. He's saying those words on our behalf to elevate what we cannot always elevate on our own. Sometimes we can't elevate it because it's 9:30 in the morning and we were up really late the night before, and oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm back here, I was just here last night. Sometimes it's as simple as that. We can't always be there. We can't always be in the prayer. We can't always do that for a lot of reasons. Again, we may not know the language. It happens to be a foreign language for almost everybody in the room. It may be because we don't really believe some of the things that are in the prayers. We don't really think that, when I do the Musaf service, am I really looking forward to burning those lambs and sheep? Not really. That's not something I'm looking forward to or believing in particularly. There may be things in there that we object to. If I'm in an Orthodox service and I have to have men near me, on the other side, heaven forbid they're near me, but thanking God that they weren't born a woman like I am, I'm not fond of that. There may be things in there, I don't want to say Isha Yisrael, I'm not sure I want a temple with all those fires again. I could envision a different future. So there may be things we object to, there may be things we absolutely have no understanding of. There may be things that when we are reading the Hebrew like this, and the person who's on the beam is going ahead through the prayer like that, I'm never going to get to the end of it when they get to the end of it, under any circumstances. So that person is there not to be my intermediary, not to say it for me, but to help to elevate my words and bring the words that I can't always get out in a significant way, so that they still reach heaven, so that they still reach God, so that He can still hear them and attribute them to me, because if I could, I would. If I had that voice, I would. If I had that command, I would. If I had the energy at that hour, I would. A lot of things are preventing some of us from making those meaningful prayers as meaningful as they could be. Again, including a lack of understanding of what they say. But a shaliach can help to do that. But it's not an intermediary. It doesn't relieve me of the responsibility. It's not to say, you pray for me. I'm going to a golf game. Or you pray for me. I'm reading my, Nora Roberts book. Whatever. It's not to say you've relieved me of my responsibility. I have to still put the effort forth to try to do it. And in doing so, that little extra utz comes from somebody else. There's also, for some people, the physical choreography of it is kind of foreign. I'm bending, I'm bowing, I'm shuffling, I'm doing, what is the person doing? ADHD, stand still. So for some of it, that's an uncomfortable. It's lots of reasons. Some people can't stand through it. There are all kinds of things. So shaliach helps to do that, okay? But it isn't in my place. It doesn't relieve me of my responsibility. But not everybody wants to pray to God, as it says in here, He is the only one to do it. Some people put things out for the universe. They put things out in a very different way. They are much more comfortable saying things in their own way rather than scripted, prescribed, ancient, impersonal, public group ways. There are things that are much more meaningful to them. And so that may be something, again, that is uncomfortable. Not everyone wants to pray to God, and not everybody feels a need to pray. Some people are just fine without it. So again, is it a deal breaker? So the next piece then, if we now have all of this, and we believe all of these wonderful things about this big, great, powerful, wonderful, expansive God, and we've developed a line of communication so that He is the only one that we communicate with, we now take another leap and say, okay, you know what, I'm not the only one in a relationship with Him. This is, I'm sorry to say, it's not an exclusive relationship. So He has relationships with lots and lots of people, and when He picks certain people, I believe with perfect faith that all the words of the prophets are true. That all of the words that our prophets have spoken are absolutely true. Prophecy is also something infinite. And prophecy for us is not fortune telling. It's not, I can see the future. It's not that kind of Karnak thing. So prophecy for us is having the infinite, the mind and knowledge of the infinite, finding a way to communicate with us who are very finite, meeting us at our level, and finding some way in which He can communicate with us exactly what He means. Not interpretation, not through the prism of, you know, I have a dysfunctional family, or from the prism of I'm very wealthy, or the prism of I'm just a kid. Not from that. But strip all of those things away, and absolute clear communication. Not inspiration. This is not divine inspiration, but absolutely understanding, revealing, communicating in a very intimate way because of this close relationship with someone that He has chosen, that He knows will not editorialize, will not have an ulterior motive for what they're saying, will not color it, will not varnish it, will not change it in any way, but will give that clear message exactly as it's transmitted. So prophets are very carefully chosen because of their ability and willingness eventually to do that, to bring that message that God is giving them into the world. Usually it's at a time of some sort of political problem, social crisis. They're there to warn, they're there to counsel, they're there to comfort, they're there to foretell what's going to happen if we don't or if we do different things. Lots of times they're very, very reluctant. We have, prophets like Moses. I'm not your guy. I can't do it. I don't talk so well. They won't know they won't like me. I'm an Egyptian. I can't get it across to them. Lots of times they're reluctant that way. Jeremiah, hey, I'm just a kid. Why don't you go pick on somebody your own size and let them go talk to the people because they're not going to buy what I'm saying. Jonah, I'm not going to those people. Let them fall apart. They're not even Jews. Why should I go save them? I'm getting on a boat. Not working. So lots of times you have people who are very, very reluctant. But God knows that when His message is put into them, that they will be true to it. That once they understand it, once they are enlightened by it, they will give it in an unvarnished, clear, uneditorialized, absolute way, exactly as He wants it transmitted. So this kind of position was what became a necessity after Sinai. Because, of course, at Sinai, God tries to give revelation to all of us, and our response is, I can't listen to that. Have you heard? Oh my God, my ears. I can't even, please. This is too much. The loud, the noise, the smoke. Please, talk to Moses. Just talk to Moses and Moses will talk to me. I'll get it from him. So we were very willing to have somebody else get the message. And from then on, that became the way that it worked. so that somebody who could listen, would present it, and would not shirk from it, again, even after arguments at the beginning, would be the one to do it, because it was not something we were ready for. Okay? And these prophets did not speak before they were spoken to. They were all approached. It came to them. But they had a very strong will. They had a very strong heart. They had a very strong sense, eventually, of community and a need to make the people hear and see. It became as much of a cause to them as it was to God, which again shows that what they are saying is His. It's not theirs. They're not coming with their version. They're coming with the Word. They're coming with the ultimate truth. And so because of that, we need to believe that that's who they are. The question becomes, again, if that is really something that is necessary. Are the words of somebody like Ezekiel less meaningful to me if I don't believe that he literally ascended into the heavens and saw the wheels and saw the workings of the inner court of God? It was incorporeal and shouldn't be sitting on anything anyway. Do I really have to believe that that was the literal truth? If I believe that Ezekiel has a vision that's metaphorical, but that teaches me something so important to my soul about who we are and what we need to do, isn't that enough? Do I really have to believe that everything he said was true? I mean, you know, if you read some of the things that he wrote, it's questionable what he might have been smoking. So I wouldn't necessarily hold it against him if he said he saw all those things. But I have a lot to learn from what came out of them. Is it really necessary that we believe that everything they're saying is exactly accurate? And is it really important? Is it that much of a deal breaker if they do editorialize a little? If because of their passion, because of their understanding of how significant this is to God that he wants to get it across to us, they put it in the vernacular of their own day. They put it in terms of what the people will believe, of what will mean to them, what it means to have an unfaithful wife. Well, that's how God feels. If what they are saying comes out of that passion of their understanding, isn't that okay too? Do I have to believe that literally, word by word, Jonah really was in a whale? Big fish, big fish. Do I really need to believe that those things happen? Or is the experience and the educational value, the emotional value, more significant than the literal thing? Especially for things that are, hard to swallow. So I don't know, again, if this for some people really matters. Are you still a Jew if you think that some of those things are beautiful poetry and allegory and not actual truth, not actual experience? Questionable. Again, where many will draw the line is other prophets who've come along, false prophets, whether Jesus was, whether Muhammad was. That's where some of it is going to come into play as far as, again, people will draw the line over certain things. And then there's the question of who is a false prophet, and there's really no guide from, even in his perplexed, there's no guide for how to know if a person really is a prophet. Are those prophets that are codified in the books in the Nevi'im, are they the only prophets that there are? Was Martin Luther King a prophet? Are those words of prophecy that we should be listening to? Were those inspiration, or were those communicated? It's unclear how we can know who's a prophet and who isn't. But the next logical piece that comes from that is, I believe with perfect faith, it must be nice, I believe with perfect faith that the prophecy of Moses is absolutely true. He was the chief of all the prophets, and actually it calls him the Av. He's the father of all prophets, both before and after him. He's the father of the prophets who came before him, good trick. He's the father of the prophets that came after him. There was an absoluteness in the same way that there is no comparison of anybody who is like God. There is no prophet who is like Moses. Moses is absolute. He's the only vessel that was ever able to fully receive the absolute truth on every level. He was the only one authorized to present and give us the Torah and imbue Torah in us. No one could arise to censor him. No one could arise to change what he said, to contradict what he said, to deny what he said. If they did, open up earth, swallow them up. There was no way for anybody to usurp his role. And so the Torah is not his take on the Torah. It's the Torah. The law he gives is not his version or his understanding of the law. It's the law. There's something about Moses that makes him beyond anyone else, and that gives everything he says permanence and authority and eternality that none of the other prophets were able to achieve. And in some ways, he's presented as more like God than any of the others. Even though we don't worship him as a God, even though he isn't a God. But the fact that he is looked at as the father of prophets who came before, as well as prophets that came after, gives him that eternal peace that sounds bad, eternal peace. Gives him that eternal aspect that God has as well, of being the before and the after and everything in between. He is father to generations on every end. We're told that his physical needs were not there. He did not have the same physicality that other people did. That he did not have to have things in a dream or in a vision. He did not have to be unconscious, but he could talk to God and have prophecy at any time. He could talk to God at any time. He could be completely lucid, eyes wide open, there to participate in the experience, which was not something that other prophets were able to do. He could function normally through the experience of prophecy. He did not need to suspend being who he was in order to receive the word of God, which makes him very different. And yet, when we talk about him, and even though at the end of the Torah it says there has never been, never will be another prophet like Moses, we don't talk about him as a Navi. We don't talk about him in all of the books of the prophets. He is Rabbeinu. He is our teacher. So even though he holds this exalted status, it isn't necessarily what we identify him as. For us, he is our teacher, and he's not given any kind of divine honors or divine status for that. Even though we're told he could talk to God mouth to mouth, he spoke to God face to face, as a friend. And I love that it says that about him, that he spoke to him face to face as a friend. I mean, the intimacy of that relationship is unbelievable. It's so touching to me and that he could then die with a kiss. So the fact that he had this very, very different relationship puts any prophecy, any information that he gave us, any vision, any insight into who we are, and any message, any Torah, as very different from anybody else. The interesting thing, though, is even though we all call him Moshe Rabbeinu, he's never called Rabbeinu in the Mishnah. And the reason that he's not called Rabbeinu in the Mishnah is because Jesus was a rabbi, and there was a very big desire to keep Moses out of the realm of this rabbi, teacher person, lest there be confusion. I think maybe they were different, but so again, the other piece is to remember that all of this information that Moses gave us is not just our written Torah, it is our oral Torah as well. All of that was imparted to him. So all of the information that we get in our oral law, oral Torah, is from him as well, which gives that a credence, which is why when people say it's written, then you say, well, no, it's not. Open a Chumash, it's not written there anywhere. Oh, but it's written because he said it and then we wrote it, so it's written. So the fact that he gave it to us gives it that power, gives it that ultimate truth, because it was spoken by him, and he spoke nothing but the words that God gave him to speak to us. a little bit of a problem with that? Maybe. Moses, to say that everything that he said was truth, does that mean that when he said, let's just kill me now, I don't want to be associated with these people, is that something that was what God was telling him to do? No, because God argued with him. I'm not going to do that. I'm not starting with it. There are times that what he is saying is clearly not the message of God. There are times when what he's saying gets changed later into something else. It can't be absolutely true about women's rights of inheritance if later on it's absolutely different and he speaks about women's rights of inheritance with the daughters of Tzlachah. There are things that if you look at it in Torah, and we'll get into this one now with the next one, there are mistakes, there are changes, there are things that he's writing about that happen after he's gone. Pretty difficult to believe that he's the one to say. So that leads us into the next one, which is, I believe with perfect faith that the entire Torah that we have now, is that which was given to Moses. When we look at our Torah, it is what Moses brought from Sinai, what he had dictated to him, the absolute word of God that he wrote with no interpretation, with no breach. It's not a synthesis of what he thought and what God thought together. It can't be discredited, it can't be discarded because it is the word that was given to him. And when we look at it, every single word in it, every space in it, every letter, every lack of a letter, everything in it, every crown, every filial, everything that's in it has a holiness and a significance we may not even understand, and they're all equally holy and equally true and equally vital for us to read and to understand, because that is what he brought from God to us. So even those wonderful passages about pus and walls that are bleeding and every impossible thing that you could ever want to not read about through Leviticus, and all of those verses that those of us who read Torah hate to read, and so-and-so begat so-and-so, who begat so-and-so, who begat so-and-so, and so-and-so begat so-and-so, and the concubine of so-and-so begat so-and-so, and begat so. Every one of those, of names that nobody's ever named after anymore, and with good reason, all of those pieces are just as important as, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Every one of those verses is exactly as important as God creating the world with his word. Every one of those is as important as crossing the sea. Every single one holds value and holiness because of its source, which is God through his perfect servant Moses, who changed nothing from what God had to what he gave to us. So, as the conduit, not the author, as the person who transcribed it, it is without error and it is sacred. And we have to have faith in it even when we don't understand it. So, of course, the problem with that is, if you've ever looked at it up close, mistakes all over the place. There are places where words are misspelled, and you cannot tell me that God couldn't have told Moses how to spell it when he was writing it. There are places where it says something in one chapter and a completely contradictory thing is written in another chapter. There are places where if you look at it and say, oh, so all of the animals were killed, and there are no animals left in Egypt, and then a couple of plagues later, the cattle are getting, wait a second, what cattle? All the animals are dead. How can the firstborn be dying? There are places that make absolutely no sense. There are places that a feminine verb is with a masculine noun. There are places where plurals are thrown in with singulars. There are places where words cannot possibly match with each other. And we do have the corrections that are given to us, but how can we correct it? It's perfect. How do you change the spelling and say, oh no, I know it says that Aaron held up his hand, but it really meant his hands, so let's say his hands, shall we? It doesn't say that. There are places that are completely imperfect, even though it's perfect. There are places where there are flights of time. You know, there's the old saying that there's no before and there's no after in the Torah. The things that are here, even though of course we haven't been given any of the laws about which animals are pure and which animals are impure, certainly no one knew which animals were impure and impure to put on the boat. Well, why would he know that? Because we're not going to know that for a very long time. There are places where the timeline makes no sense. There are places where the age of a person, if you start going through the chronology, makes absolutely no sense for a wife to be 3, there are things to be reckoned with in this perfect document. And if that's true, if it's not his word, we need to then decide. It is not necessarily believing that it is his perfect word revealed to this perfect prophet who not only didn't speak very well, but apparently didn't spell very well. If that's the case, does that negate the significance of the text? Does our believing that about the text mean that we are less enlightened by the text? That we have less of a relationship with the text, which is again Maimonides' goal. He wants us to have a perfect, absolute relationship with the absolute creator and the absolute Torah. So if I'm willing to say, well, I'm not really so sure that the Torah we have is what was given to Moses, partly because I've seen the Dead Sea Scrolls and they aren't the same, and partly because I've seen some Torahs that have one thing and other versions that have others. Does that make me have less of a relationship, or does that make me have more of a relationship? Because I want to reconcile how those things can exist at the same time. If I can find truth in it, is that really what's supposed to happen? Not necessarily believing all of those errors are there for a reason, and I would if only I had the capacity to understand why those things were so odd, then it would mean something different to me.
It's my understanding that Torah was not written all at once. It was written over a period of time. So is that?
Not to Maimonides. Yes, we have many scholars. I mean, if you look at now, you're going to have the J tradition of the people where it was Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh as the God that we read about. You've got the passages, the separate sections that are the Elohim passages. We have had scholars over a long time who have dissected who the different authors might have been and at what time. And when you have something like, here's how the world was created, and then the next chapter, here's how the world was created. But I thought you said that was how the world was created. No, this is how the world, but how was this the world? It's because 2 other people wrote it and something else was inserted at another time that was written at another time. If you're going to accept Maimonides, that's not it. Darn it, if you could understand it better, you'd see why both of those conflicting things were in there. Because that's what God intended when he gave it to Moses. If only you could figure that one out. For others, it's, wait a second, so I see that we had a certain agrarian culture in which certain things were written that made sense. We had other cultures that were trying to deal with polytheistic neighbors and their beliefs, and so we had to put in something that was going to not compete with, but somehow replace, but make people happy with what was there. We had a system with slavery we wanted to outlaw, so we could put in these, but we could make rules that could end up making it obsolete at some point. So we can look at that now from modern times and say that. So then the question is, if it's not, that's the difference between people who believe in it being revealed and people who believe in it being inspired. Is it what inspired men, woman, no way, is it what inspired men wrote based on divine inspiration? Is it what inspired men wrote based on trying to get a religion off the ground and have a monotheistic culture that could exist within warring neighbors? Is it a revealed word? all written at the same time by Moses from Word of God. Amos. So again, if you don't believe that, and if you're fascinated by, did J write this, did D write this, if that kind of thing interests you, and if you try to reconcile that and see how that makes sense, are you less of a Jew? Are you not a Jew?
That's part of being Jewish.
For many of us, that's exactly that's the best part of being Jewish, right? 2 Jews, 3 opinions. What's the point? Okay, so, again, for him, this was so self-evident. Obviously it came from God. What, didn't you read it? It said right there, God gave it to him. Come on now, it couldn't be, it's in black and white. It's in, walnut white. So, that's part of the belief. Again, is that critical to your being a Jew, my being a Jew, anybody being a Jew? So now it says, I believe with perfect faith that this Torah will not be changed, and that there will never be another Torah given by God. He gave it once. If you're not happy with it, deal with it. I'm not giving you another one. So this is it. Not going to be changed. Even God wouldn't change it. He wouldn't change it. Don't change it. Okay? Otherwise, it wouldn't be absolute. And that's the whole point. God is absolute. The Torah is absolute. Prophecy is absolute. If a Torah could change, it will change. I'm sorry. It will change based on necessity. It will change based on fear of punishment from cultures that may not be so friendly to it. It will change because, frankly, parts of it are really embarrassing, and we'd rather not have people think we think those things. It will change because it's convenient, because some parts are just too hard to do. Can't we find it easier? Really meat and milk dishes and cheese, can't we do something about that? So if it can change, it will. And so that means that we have to say, oh, it can't. It just can't. It just can't. He would never do it. We can't do it. It's never going to change it. And we're not getting another one. So learn to live with this one and figure out what it means and how to do what it says. And if it changed also, that would mean that one revelation experience can be replaced or replicated. That the beauty and the miracle of revelation was not a unique experience. Because it could do it again with a new book or books. So that wouldn't work either. So it also would mean that the Torah that was given to us was good in its day. Yeah, it's good points. It made sense back then. In that location, for those people, in those days, who spoke that language, who lived in that part of the world. It was a good book. But it would be a better book. We can't have that. We can't have that. And so, it's not something temporary. Is that hot? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, this one's cold. It has to always be relevant. It has to always be appropriate. And so, one of the ways of making that happen is the fact that the oral law came with it. And the oral law helps to soften the rough edges. The oral law helps us to say what he meant by that was. Or, I'm not asking you to do it that way all the time. What I really need to say is what matters is. And the oral law helps to give us interpretation without changing, but interpretation and understanding. For me, I've said it before, the Torah, the written Torah, is the skeleton. The oral Torah is the muscle and sinew and flesh that animates the skeleton. The skeleton can't move on its own. It has to have all of these other pieces. That's what the oral Torah does. It breathes life and gives movement and options to that skeleton of the written Torah. So, if it's unchangeable, excuse me, then all of us who read Torah have a problem because of all of those little places where you see the asterisk on the side that says, even though it says this, it really means this. So we've already changed it. If it's unchangeable, then the Masorites really might not have been doing the best job because there are lots of places where it says, we're not sure if the vowel here was this or if it was this, and we're not really sure if we remember it, and so we're putting this one in. Sometimes we'll have you go back and say it this way and then say it the other way a second time so we make sure we're covering all of our bases because we're really not sure what it said. And other places where we clearly have made changes. Certainly if we take different texts. So if it's divine and it can't be changed, we've already broken that rule. And that's the problem. So if it's supposed to last for eternity, what is it about it that's supposed to last for eternity? Maybe not, excuse me, the spelling. Maybe not the exact vocabulary. And the reality is we have also changed it by the fact that if you read a translation in Ezchai, and you read a translation in stone, and you read a translation in plowed, you're not reading the same book. We've already changed it by that. We've changed it by the fact that some of the words that are in it are so arcane that nobody has a clue what they mean anymore. So they make up a word for it that seems to work in the context that they would like the sentence to have. And it works for them. But it may not work for somebody else, so they'll call it something else. One of my favorites is the commentary that the Ve'ahavta, and you will love the Lord, was really supposed to be Ve'ihavta, and you will make the Lord beloved. That couldn't change. I mean, that's a huge change. From me loving him to finding ways to make other people love him, very different. Same word. Same consonant. So we've already changed it by putting our human fingers on it. I'm thinking I'm almost done, and we've actually gone later than I thought. I don't know if I'll start. Sorry. With some of the others, I mean, you've got the rest of these next time. And it's a shame because we're getting to the ones that everyone is going to go, there's my deal breaker. So we'll just try and go really fast then. Really tend that God knows everything that we're doing, all that we do, all that we say, all that we think, all that we act, everything about it. And again, that's part of this absolute relationship that we're supposed to have with him, that there's nothing that we do that he doesn't know about. Doesn't mean there's nothing we do he doesn't do something about. He may watch us do it. Like, my father watched me go off on that two-wheeler for the first time and fall on my face. He may let us do that to learn. He may let us do that because we're not his favorite at the moment. That's not why my mother or father let me do that. They love me. There may be lots of reasons he doesn't intervene. It may be because, like both teams at the Super Bowl can't ask God to win and have both of them do it. You've got conflicting prayers. They can't do it all. He has his reasons. We have to believe he has his reasons. Oh, that's nice. So, again, that one is a very hard one for people to deal with in the age of post-Holocaust. Was he really there? Was he really watching? Was he listening? If he knew all that, how could he sit it out? How could he ride through it? Same thing as the next one, that he will punish anyone who transgresses. We've watched people get away with plenty. With murder. We've watched so many people not get punished. It's hard to believe that he actually will punish. Whether the belief is in the world to come, so they get away with it here, but In eternity, they're going to suffer. That's a little different. But the last two are the kickers for almost anybody. The coming of the Messiah, absolute faith, I believe perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah, and the resurrection of the dead. Bodies of the dead being resurrected in the world to come. Those, for most people, are going to be the deal breakers. That not everyone believes that the Messiah will come. There may be a messianic era, there may be messianic days, but an actual physical human being descended from the line of David to come along and do that.
I think that's it.
I'm sorry, I better stop.
Yes.
Have some water, will you?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Someone